Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. And if you enjoy this fanfic, what if Naruto hid his identity while protecting the Moon Witch Hinata? Naruto x Hinata Part 1. Then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Tucked away in a corner of the universe, surrounded by the hallways of different realms, Hinata Hyuga plucked at people's faces. Please tell me where it hurts. This face was a recurring one. Most of them were. She was very good at her job, and people have often told her that her voice was something they'd come back to, even if her services were not necessarily needed. But this one, he came nearly every week for the past 5 months. He had to. The things grew on his face like weeds, and no matter how much she plucked, they always managed to come back when he'd visit her corner a few days later. Often, she'd find lines of the things on his cheeks, and today was no exception. When he showed up, half of his face hidden under the normal cover of his hooded cloak, she'd caught sight of it all immediately, and her shoulders bowed as her fingers popped, preparing. He had a husky, boyish voice that had made her heart skitter along the edge of her ribcage upon hearing it for the first time. Something was familiar about it, but she was too focused on brushing her fingers along his tan skin to really focus much on that feeling. His right cheek leaned a bit into her touch, and his lips formed into a smile. In times like this, she wondered what his eyes looked like and if they shined as brightly as the rest of him. But people who wandered about this corner of the universe were often the secretive type, and she didn't dare break the trust between the both of them. You know you never hurt me. Her thumb and index finger tugged lightly at a sticker. It was stuck to his skin, and Hinata pursed her lips in concentration. That's not what I meant. That bright smile simmered, then sunk. Oh, right. The wooden chair he sat upon creaked as he shifted, and Hinata dropped her hands to the thin table between them, fingers curling patiently along the smooth surface. The 5 months he's been coming to her gave her great insight into the kind of sharer he was, and though it definitely wasn't the hardest to work with, it still required much patience. He liked to take his time, often changing subjects and dancing around certain topics until he felt comfortable discussing them. She figured today would be any normal day for him, so she was slightly surprised upon the words that slipped so cleanly from his lips. I'm worried about something. She could have guessed that much. The majority of the people who sought her out had some kind of worry. He must have heard the obviousness in his sentence, for he grinned sheepishly before continuing. About a guy the first no, a friend. He's the kind that keeps to himself, real quiet, you know. And, well, he's always been that way, but recently, well, I dunno. He's been off. It's hard to explain. A gloved hand rose to rub at the temple beneath the dark blue hood, and he groaned. And he's giving me a massive headache 'cause he's so damn stubborn about his health. Hinata watched the black stickers on his face move with his cheeks as he spoke. They didn't loosen their hold on his skin, and she had to focus to keep from tapping her finger anxiously on the table. May I help you with it? Another smile. Please. Her hands rose once again, skimming the bridge of his nose that led her fingers beneath the hood, where she found his forehead. Her thumbs worked smooth, gentle circles into the temples while her other fingers wrapped around his skull, finding his short, soft hair. She didn't get to feel it much, but when she did, she always enjoyed it. And he, obviously, felt the same way. After a minute of massaging, nothing disturbing the silence aside from distant, clinking glassware and quiet murmuring, Hinata pulled her hands down to his cheeks, grabbed hold of a sticker, and was pleased to find it loose. This friend, she said softly, do you want me to help him? His head tipped a bit, and he sighed. That's the thing. I don't know if he'll even agree to meet you, let alone get help from you. He doesn't like new people. Trusting issues, or some shit. She hummed a calming beat upon feeling his pulse race beneath the thin skin under her fingertips. It's hard for me to help those who cannot trust me enough to share their troubles with me. Her index finger tapped lightly on the underside of his cheekbone, and they both shared a knowing smile. But, if you can somehow get him here, I can assure you I will put in all of my effort to help him. His face bloomed with color as his cheeks pulled back with his grin, and some of the stickers fell off. Relieved, Hinata began working on the ones that stayed on. You're amazing, Moon. She didn't even blink at the nickname. It was common for them all to refer to her as such. It was important she kept her identity as secret as possible, even if her eyes, white and luminous, gave her away as being from one of the moon districts. Confidentiality was mainly why she was there, in the shadows of the corner between realms, decked in a long, thick shawl that kept her features hidden from view. Her old name, Hinata Hyuga of Moon 2, was something she did not hear much, and when she was alone and thinking, she wondered if she'd one day forget it. Instead, that nickname of hers was what people often spoke in regards to her, whether when speaking to her or about her. At first, it had been unsettling to be referred to as such, especially when. Well, it didn't matter now. And you worry too much, she said, keeping her tone soft and without humor, intending to show him she was being serious, in a gentle way, of course. You always come to me about someone, a friend, an enemy, an ally. But rarely is it for yourself. She removed the last of the stickers and smiled at her work. Please, remember that it's okay to give yourself some time. Sometimes, you should divulge in selfishness, if only for your own sake. His chest rumbled, and he laughed, catching the attention of a few passing folks. Hinata blushed and bowed her head, and they both stood from their chairs. I guess you're right, he said, grinning as he wrapped the belt around his cloak tighter, hiding more of himself from peering eyes. But I ain't usually in the position to do that, well, unless I'm with you, of course. Her blush grew, and she was glad to have most of her face hidden. Then feel free to come to me more, she said, folding her hands in front of her. You know where to find me. Another laugh. When he was at home, free of his hood, did he laugh like that often? Did the people around him realize how amazing such a laugh was, so amazing that it could sometimes remove the stickers from his face without her even lifting a pinky? Hinata supposed they didn't, but she still wondered. Well, since you don't mind, I'll stop by tomorrow. Same time, but with, his grin went back to that slanted sheepishness. You really don't mind helping him out. I don't think you realize, the guy is a lot of work. Mean as hell, stubborn as hell, you'll be alright with that. There he went again, worrying for others. But still, it felt nice to know he cared. About her. Clearing her thoughts, Hinata gave a small nod. I promised you I'd try my best. Tipping her head back, face lifting towards the dim, hanging lights above, she allowed him to catch a glance at her determined smile. So I will do just that. The lights flickered and brightened, and he reached to give her left shoulder a firm grasp. Thank you, he whispered, tone low. He sounded so much like a man. Hinata didn't hear this tone often, but every time she did, it was as if the world had gotten brighter. Seriously, Moon, for everything. The muscles in her knees trembled, and Hinata nodded and patted that hand on her shoulder. See you tomorrow, she whispered as he turned and left. And though she was not supposed to, it was against her morals to stick her nose into the secrecies of her clients, she couldn't help but trail slowly behind him, past tables and chairs, until she saw him within the main part of the hall, the stained glass of the large, dome roof casting a rainbow of color on his otherwise dull, blue-clad form, making it look like he were light itself. She lingered along the edge of the dimly lit corner she had kept herself, watching him as he went to one of the three, large doorways that made up most of the hall. She knew it well. It led to the sky realm. And when he placed his hand on a stone dial by the doorway, she saw he had chosen Sun 1, and she saw something light and fluttery beneath the swishing back of his cloak before a massive, sparkling portal appeared before him, and he stepped in. Lights sung, and then the gate closed, and Hinata pressed a hand to her chest as the murmur returned to its relaxed hum. Of course, she thought, peeking back up at the dome, he'd be from that place. Spying again, Moon. Not many people could say that name with such jest, and even if some could, it wouldn't have the same background knowledge that Tsunade Senju had with every syllable she mused. It always made Hinata feel trapped, caught. It took her a moment to calm the shivering spider on her spine, and with slow care, she turned away from the hall to trail her gaze along the open room she resided most of her days inside. Her eyes had to adjust back to the warm, dim lighting, and she was a bit startled with how full of people it was. Not to the brim, naturally, since it was only midday, but still a lot of people, and Hinata curled her fingers along the hem of her shawl as she made her way past tables and chairs to get to the bar in the back. Tsunade Senju was a rugged woman, ruggedly beautiful. Many passing men would murmur upon sighting her, but also rugged in the sense that she was more likely to break your fingers off than take any ounce of shit from you. And, somehow, that made her all the more attractive, and Hinata often had to leave before the evening to avoid the crowd that the blonde, alone, could conjure. But it wasn't just her looks and her toughness that brought people to her. He's going to notice, eventually, with all that followin', you do. But also her keen knowledge of everything, and especially of Miss Hinata Hyuga. Blushing, Hinata rubbed her fingers anxiously along the polished granite of the bar top. Bits of topaz within the stone winked at her as Tsunade moved, shadow sweeping along the bar. Peeking at the figures a few stools away, hoping they weren't listening in, Hinata stuttered, I wasn't trying. Of course you weren't. Tsunade's red lips curled into a smirk as she worked at cleaning a glass with her rag, arms bare and muscles protruding with every swipe she made. Oak eyes found Hinata's shadowed gaze, signaling with a raised brow that she wouldn't take her fibbing for even a second. So, when are ya planning to ask him for help? Somehow, she knew she would ask that question. They both knew the kind of situation Hinata was in. I don't think I can. Really? Tsunade asked, genuine confusion lining her tone. They both glanced at the other figures at the bar, saw that they were too caught up in the bottoms of their glasses, and relaxed slightly. Tsunade dropped her rag and put a hand to her. He's obviously from Sky. He can get you back to Moon, no problem. And were it just that, Hinata wouldn't need convincing. But it was a lot more complicated than that. Tsunade, she said, leaning a bit over the bar, thigh brushing against the velvet seat of the stool to her right, you know Sun can't go to Moon. So you've told me. And maybe normal Sun can't, but he ain't that. Once again, the lights buzzed and flickered. The normal murmur seemed to die down, or maybe that was just her being paranoid. It wasn't safe to talk this openly about things like this. He's from Sun 1. So she had noticed. Not that it made a difference. Sun 1 or Sun 9, it didn't matter where he was from. He couldn't go to Moon either way. And Hinata couldn't understand why Tsunade thought differently. They've known each other for years, probably. Hinata couldn't pinpoint the exact amount, but she knew Tsunade. She trusted Tsunade. Everyone who worked at this bar, a hotspot for those traveling between realms, she knew and trusted her life with, and in turn, she gave them the knowledge of her people and of the people of the Sky Realm. So for Tsunade to believe something so adamantly, something that simply wasn't true, something that Hinata, herself, has taught her was simply not true, it was confusing. Befuddling. Perplexing. Tsunade. Don't give me that tone. A fist slammed on the surface, and the bodies a few stools away jumped. Hinata, how long are you going to stay down here when we both know damn well your family needs you up there? The sound of her name left her breathless. The mention of her family, however, was what made her feel dizzy. Grasping the side of the bar, Hinata balanced herself, scared she would fall at any moment without support. Blinking, Tsunade quickly grabbed one of the glasses she had just cleaned and filled it with water before sliding it to Hinata, who swallowed it all in one gulp. Still not used to it, huh? Tsunade said with the click of her tongue. You're gonna dehydrate yourself if you keep forgetting about it. Realizing she hadn't even noticed the dryness in her mouth or the pain on the sides of her neck, Hinata mumbled a thank you, downed the last drops of water, and gently placed the glass down. Tsunade took it, smirking, and Hinata, knowing she had nowhere better to go for a while, sat down on the stool next to her. Thank you for always looking out for me, she said, smiling, running her tongue along the back of her teeth. I know you just want me to get back home, I do, too. But I have to be careful, Tsunade. You know that, and though I want his help, I know I can't get it. Sun can't fly in moon. Humming, rolling her shoulders, Tsunade turned to pull one of the bottles off of the back shelf. Hinata didn't get a good look at the name, but just the color of it alone as Tsunade poured it in a glass, a nice, deep scarlet hue, told her it was some kind of wine. I dunno, she said, tone low and wistful, as she sipped at her wine, that guy seems like a good flyer to me. How does she know that? Hinata wondered, watching her. Do you, know him? I don't, she said, but Kakashi does. Licking her lips, she smirked again and stared Hinata down. What? Want me to get him to tell you who he is? Tempted, though she was, Hinata knew her place. Shaking her head, she asked for another glass of water, and Tsunade served it to her without ever letting go of her wine. I thought you weren't supposed to drink while on the job. As long as that hard-ass Jiraiya don't hear about it, I'm in the clear. Hearing the subtle warning, Hinata laughed and sipped at her water. A body stumbled next to her, brushing shoulders with her, and she quickly tugged down her shawl before he could get a good look at her features. But his gaze never fell on her, instead, it stayed glued to Tsunade's figure. Oi, bar lady. His voice was low and groggy, and his words were slurred. Hinata got a good look at the empty glass he held up, as if presenting a trophy to someone. Give me the same thing, but more whiskey. And not any of that cheap shit, either. Huffing, not even blinking at his crude language, Tsunade kept drinking her wine. Can you afford anything better than the cheap whiskey? Sneering, running a hand through his dark blue hair, the guy looked ready to crawl over the bar to grab some himself. Can't ya see I ain't in the mood for your attitude? Give me the drink, and I'll figure something out. Knowing Tsunade wasn't about to budge, Hinata quickly glanced at the man's face in search of something. It was rather easy to find the dark mass of stickers under his beady eyes, looking almost like dark bags in the orange lighting of the bar. Obviously, he was drinking to forget something. Her gaze fell to his left hand, found the dent of a ring on Hiso finger, and pieced things together. Actually, she piped up, cutting Tsunade off from cursing the man off. Her right hand skimmed along the bar top, catching the man's attention, pulling him away from glaring daggers at the woman behind the bar. I can pay for his drink. I don't mind. Suddenly, his entire focus was on her, and Tsunade snorted and muttered under her breath as she prepared his drink. Hinata slowly faced him, got a clearer look at the mass of stickers, and offered him a kind smile. I'm sorry you're having a rough time. His eyes were bleary as he blinked, not totally following her. What? Did you buy my drink 'cause of pity or some shit? Not really. Tsunade came back to hand him a drink, and he momentarily looked away from her. TCH. He clicked his tongue before downing half his drink. Don't expect me to thank ya if you ain't gonna at least be honest with me. Her gaze trailed the slope of his bent spine, then settled on his sagging shoulders. Turning on the stool to fully face him, she folded her hands in her lap and crossed her legs, making herself look as unintimidating as possible. Please go home after this to take a good nap, she said, tipping her chin back to let him see her calm smile. And don't try to drink so much. I understand you are going through a lot, but there are a lot more effective ways to deal with stress than drinking. His eyes rolled to her. Are you preachin' to me, now? His shoulders shook a bit as he laughed bitterly along the rim of his glass. Okay. Sure, I'll bite. Pray tell, lady, what could I possibly be doin' instead of drinkin' my lungs out? Not flinching at the sarcasm dripping from his tongue, she lifted her hands and hovered them a good 10 inches away from him. May I touch your face, sir? Sir. Somehow, he was more stuck on that than her actual question. Snapping a towel over her shoulder, Tsunade sneered, answer the damn question, you drunk. I won't hurt you, Hinata continued. I just want to help. But you have to let me. The ice in his drink clinked against the glass as he swirled it and pondered. Sighing, he shrugged his shoulders and turned to her fully. Eat your heart out. Smiling, she raised her hands and placed them on his cheekbones. His skin was cold, almost scaly, and she had to take a double glance at his neck to see if he had gills. Humming, she began to pluck the stickers off his face, satisfied with how his eyes drooped slightly under her gentle touch. She was able to get half of them off before she pulled away, asking, do you feel a bit better? His eyes blinked and widened, and he sat straight. Yeah, actually, he mused, glancing between her and the drink in his hand, as if trying to decide which, exactly, made him feel better. How did you do that? Hinata laughed and slipped off her stool to stand. I'm sure when you get home and sleep, you'll feel even better. He frowned. Easier said than done, lady. My ex. His shoulders jumped, and he grumbled and drank the rest of his drink. Damn thing making me say things I don't even wanna say. Pulling her coin purse out, Hinata dropped a few silver coins on the bar, which Tsunade scooped up into an antique register. When she turned back to the man, he had something of a look of wonder in his gaze. She was used to it. Lots of people looked at her that way when she first plucked at them. Do you still live with them, sir? She asked, wondering if she would have to elaborate for him to fully understand. But, thankfully, his drunken mind seemed to sharpen, and he rolled his eyes once again. Not for long, I sure hope. And will you stop calling me that? He rubbed the back of his head for a moment, hesitating on something, before shaking his head. It's Kisame. Just Kisame. I've had enough of my damn last name for a while. 3 stickers fell from his skin, and Hinata offered a grin. Nice to meet you, Kisame. Please call me Moon. Moon, he repeated, the corner of his lips curling. What the hell? Because of your eyes. He gestured to his own. His were also white, but not exactly like hers. They were beady and small, almost like that of an animal's. I mean, I have no room to speak. Didya know my name means demon shark? Yeah, I'm sure my folks had an absolute thrill with that one. He smirked and shook his glass in the air. Oi, bar lady, another one for the road, will ya? Tsunade scowled. Get your broke ass outta here before I kick ya out myself. He laughed, this one sounding a lot more genuine, before he hopped off his stool and swayed a bit. Hey, lady, Moon, was it? Got any good ideas of where I can hunker down after I escape the clutches of my ex? Something, you know, on the low. Away from it all. Hinata smiled, already having an idea. Where do you live now, Kisame? His shoulder rolled to the hall, in the direction of the Earth Gate. Forest 6. It's hell there. Whatever you do, Moon, never live there. She nodded and tapped a finger on her chin. Well, if you want secluded, I would suggest, she tucked her hand along the side of her shawl, pulling the fabric back to reveal the gills along her neck, somewhere in ocean. He barked in laughter and rubbed the skin where his own set of gills would be. Damn. Didn't reckon someone with your eyes would be in ocean. He grinned at her playfully, showing off a set of sharp teeth, and Hinata realized that, Perhaps, long ago he had been in ocean, and, maybe, they were in the same boat. But hey, I guess we all got reasons to leave, right? Over his shoulder, Tsunade snorted, and Hinata had to focus on keeping her smile present. I suppose so, Kisame. The hall was full, and the glass above glowed dimly with a sort of silvery glow, signifying to Hinata that it was time to go home. Well, not her real home. She doubted she'll ever consider it that dearly. But she slept there, ate there, survived there, so in some aspects, it was a home. Just not to her. Gathering her things, Hinata waved at Tsunade over the crowd that surrounded the bar. She was too busy with pouring drinks and counting change to notice, but Kakashi Hatake, who had arrived for his shift about an hour ago, managed to raise a hand in farewell to her before he was engulfed, once again, into work. Walking down the hall, avoiding every arm and shoulder that threatened to knock into her face, Hinata tucked her chin under the cloth of her shawl. A few glances turned her way, somehow interested in the elegant purpose in her step, and she bowed her gaze and quickened her pace, hoping those momentary gazes did not stray on her for too long. A sigh of relief left her lips the moment she got to the massive doorway that would take her home, the ocean gate. Her right hand flexed before leaving her side to land on the dial, which glowed upon her touch. The air around her shifted as she twisted it, and above her, a good 30 feet away, a number over the doorway counted up. When it reached the desired number, she pressed in the dial, and magic spilled in from the sides of the marble doorway, swirling in ribbons of indigo and blue. When the portal was stitched together, wind blasted against her face, and the smell of salt was unnoticed by her as she tugged at her shawl before stepping inside. Color, twisting and turning and swirling and whirling, took up the world. Her body shifted, every molecule buzzing, and then it stopped. And when she stepped out, she was standing upon the surface of the ocean, night sky glittering with stars above her. There was a hiss of magic behind her, then silence, and the portal closed. Hinata was home. Ocean 11, for the past 5 months, has been the place she's been returning to. And the worst thing about it was the ever-present moon hanging in the sky, seemingly just out of reach, that reminded Hinata of just how helpless she had become. I'm home, she whispered to an empty building, eyes having already adjusted to the darkness of the ocean floor. The coral walls shuddered as she closed the faded, calcite door behind her, and with feet barely brushing the stone floor, she swished to her windows, made sure they were locked and intact, and glanced out at the dark world beyond the glass pane. Ocean 11 was a district smack dab in the middle, hundreds of miles away from any sort of beach or coast, and because of that, not many people populated it. Only the desperate ones, she supposed, eyes trailing along the dark silhouette of her neighbor's home, or the ones who prefer being alone. Staring is rude, Lady Hinata. A voice she hadn't heard in a long time, genuinely, of course. But with her loneliness came a creative spark to her imagination, and with the slight tilt of her head, she witnessed Neji Hyuga in all his stoic glory. His eyes were how they always were, never once backing down from hers, as if in challenge, and his hair swayed in the lull of the ocean current. Bubbles left his mouth with every exhale he breathed because she couldn't imagine him ever in the position to need gills. He deserved better than that. Bowing her gaze, she turned away from the window and nodded. I'm sorry. It was silly, apologizing to her own imagination, but she was desperate for any sort of interaction in the freezing depths of Ocean 11, so she went along with it. He'll see you doing that one day, he continued, ignoring the guilt in her gaze, and it will be your first day all over again. Memories of that day, 5 months ago, crashed into her skull. Darkness, stinging lungs, a teasing voice, tearing pain along the skin of her neck, webbed fingers curling along her shoulder, and she shuddered and pulled the curtains closed. You're right, Neji, she whispered, abandoning the window to leave for her room down the way. I'll stop. He didn't follow, but she heard his voice as clear as day no matter where he stood in her house. No, you won't, and you won't stop lying to yourself, either, Lady Hinata. The next day started the same way they all did, with her plucking faces in the corner of the hall's bar. Please tell me your troubles, she'd whisper to one man. It's okay to feel that way, she'd say to another. I understand that feeling, came up often in a conversation she had with a woman. These words left her mouth so easily, it was in her nature, she supposed. Connecting with people, empathizing with people, even before she became that cloaked, moon-eyed figure in the dark corner, she had those strong abilities that just allowed her to see people as, well, just that. People. It came as easily as breathing. Ah, there she is. Moon. Until that day, when she met him. The familiar, hooded face of the man from Sun 1 appeared in her line of vision first, followed by one she didn't recognize. Couldn't recognize, really. How could she, when his entire face, from his forehead to the tips of his ears to the very edge of his jaw, was covered, completely and effectively, in black stickers? Oh my, was the first thought she could manage, briefly aware of a bright grin shining her way as the chair opposite of her pulled away from the table. Not once had she seen such a dramatic sight before. People had their worries, she knew. Some of them practically drowned in them. But this, she'd never seen a sight like this. She's seen necks covered, sure, she's seen entire foreheads covered, or a thick mass over the eyes. But this amount, it made her nervous. No one was sitting, and her fingers popped. She stood, color draining from her face. Waves were rolling off the covered figure, the kind that made her stomach twist. Because Hinata could emphasize with people. She could get herself into their shoes and look through their eyes without much effort behind it. It was natural, instinct, really. Almost subconscious. And upon looking at him, she couldn't stop herself. She placed herself inside him, felt the heavy mass of stickers and anxiety on her face, and immediately became sick. Her heart raced in the worst way possible, not helping at all with her knotted stomach and curled intestines. How do you deal with it? She wanted to ask, raising a hand, slowly reaching for something. For any one of those stickers on his face, hiding away any expression or color from her attentive gaze. How can I even begin to get all of these? A hand gripped her right arm. Hard. She looked down, saw the dark color of his hand, and nearly panicked, thinking there were more of them. But then reality settled on her shoulders as her senses expanded from her frantic mind, and she felt the grip of leather on the skin of her wrist. She gasped, nostrils flaring, and, "Do not touch me, ever." At that moment, smoke and blood were all she could smell. If Neji were there, his lack of manners is miserable. He would have said exactly that. But Hinata didn't have much time to ponder the irony of her figment cousin's words, for much louder and angrier words rang through the room. Shit. Not even a minute, and you're already making an ass out of yourself. Somehow, in the midst of it all, she had managed to sit down. Maybe it wasn't that surprising. Her legs were trembling, and she felt faint. But the two figures before her still stood, shoulders about as wide as the table, and upon the sudden realization that they could easily break her in two if they so desired, she winced and rubbed at her injured wrist. A tan face flashed her way, and black stickers sprung upon his twisted lips. Oi! Her head snapped up, thinking the pointed tone was directed her way. It didn't sound right with his voice. Throughout their interactions together, she'd grown accustomed to the boyish husk that simply melted into his vocal cords. He was gentle to her, kind and patient as they slowly began to trust each other, enough for her to pluck at his face, at least. But his new tone, it was on the same level as comparing the gentle trickle of a creek to the roaring of a waterfall. And when she found that he was facing the other one, his friend, she supposed, her anxiety did not dwindle an inch. You can at least apologize, You bastard. I brought ya here to help you, not to let you hurt poor Moon. Ah. And suddenly, that waterfall was outdone by a hurricane, and the gills on her neck flexed. It wasn't so much the deepness of his voice that caught her off guard. Neji had a smooth baritone that left many women in their district absolutely drooling, and she was sure her father sounded the same. He did, right? She couldn't remember. There was something else to it. Something sharp and dangerous. Something in the shadows of his throat, bubbling and oozing. Hinata wondered if the stickers had reached there, as well. So she's the Moon Witch. It must have been a million times now that she's heard that name. It came naturally with her abilities. Rumors of the witch with moon eyes that could see things no one else could, she was so familiar with it. But it still stung, and his tone especially did not lighten the blow. Sasuke. A hand rose to rub at the temples beneath a dark blue hood, and then that tan face turned back to her, stickered lips spreading into a nervous grin. I'm sorry. I told you he was like this. Maybe we should go. For a moment, his words didn't reach her. Sasuke? She wondered, glancing at the tall figure. Not an inch of his face was revealed to her, and the rest of his body was wrapped in a dark cloak and navy slacks. Nothing about him was recognizable, and yet, where have I heard that name before? But then, the rest of his words fell onto her eyes, and she blinked and straightened her back. How may I help? She asked, directly focusing on the friend. Sasuke. Is there something you wish to talk about? An arm swiped his cloak back, revealing the scabbard at his. The tsuba was decorated with gold, which had something of an ominous twinkle when revealed in the light of the bar. Why am I here? His face did not turn away from her, and because she could not see his eyes, she wondered if he was asking her that question. Was this really worth my day off? And somehow, despite the obvious dip in the atmosphere, a loud cackle sparked from the hooded sun man's lungs, and he slammed a hand on the darker man's shoulder. Ain't like you were gonna spend it on anything better. The pulled-out chair was nudged once more in a subtle invitation, for him, of course. But Hinata saw it clear as day, and based off of the irritated slope in Sasuke's shoulders, so did he. Look, I know how you are. I wouldn't have dragged you here if I didn't think it was important. She's good, really good. I dunno how she does it, but every time I come here, What, exactly, does she do? Sasuke hissed, not budging a millimeter towards that chair. What can a moon witch do for me? He made her name sound like a curse, and Hinata gripped her hands together in her lap, away from their gazes. To answer simply, she said, trying to smile, I can do whatever you need me to do. A pause. Then the cape was pulled back in place, totally hiding the scabbard, and Sasuke turned away. You owe me 2 hours of wasted time. Huh, wait. Panic came to the sun man's voice, and Hinata took a glance at his face. It was beginning to get covered, and she worried if it would ever stop. Just 5 minutes, Sasuke. That's all. I know you stopped going to the sessions at the guard, but she's different than that. And you need to start talking to normal people again. So just, damn it, Sasuke, just. The lights above flared and hissed. Stop. And like that, everything went still. Eavesdroppers a few tables away blatantly stared, and Hinata didn't even have to look at the bar to feel the irritated vibes rolling off of Tsunade. Honestly, she was surprised the woman hadn't marched over and kicked them out already. But the stillest of them all was that dark, faceless man named Sasuke, who looked as if he had been frozen in ice. Look. That's an order, Sasuke. Those long shoulders squared, and there was another hiss. I'm off duty. An order. Many things were strange at that moment. The flickering lights, the sudden composure in Sasuke's stance, the authority and power behind that once boyish tone. And Hinata was stuck on all of them, really, but she was particularly fastened upon an unusual aspect of the situation. Why does this seem so familiar? She hadn't an idea why. She's never met a Sun man before, especially not one from Sun 1. And she didn't know Sasuke aside from the familiarness of his name. She couldn't fathom why any of this seemed so. You're doing it again. She shivered as Neji's non-existent breath slinked over her shoulder. Staring won't help you remember, Lady Hinata. Her head tilted his way. Remember WH. The chair creaked, and something slammed on the table. She yelped and snapped forward. A covered face leered at her, and she didn't have to see his expression to know he was beyond unhappy. See, that wasn't too bad, but the other seemed the total opposite, and now had his normal grin back in place. Now that that's out of the way, Moon, this is Sasuke. Sasuke Uchiha of Cloud 8. Sasuke Uchiha, wait, Sasuke Uchiha, he couldn't possibly mean, EHH, but you probably know him by that other name, EH. The Thor is what they all like to call him. And that's when it clicked. He was that Sasuke. The one who had a nickname even more famous than her own. She's heard stories of him from every universe, that powerful member of the guard that every lord and lady begged to have as their protector, if even for an hour. His skills were infamous, and as was his sword. Without noticing, her gaze fell to the edge of the table, where that golden scabbard and Tsuba hid beyond her line of sight. Now I understand. Then, her gaze traveled up his folded arms, back to that dark, covered face that, surely, was giving her a look of absolute acrimony at that moment. No wonder he has so much. And if you ever call me that, Moon Witch, he bit out, voice never wavering from that sharp tone, it will be the last thing you ever mutter. Right. Her shoulders fell as reality began to come to her. Right. She's dealt with many of the same sort, the guard sort, that is. Not as many as one would expect from such a dangerous and scarring job, but still enough to count on both hands. There were many things they had in common. Would you like to share with me what's got you feeling this way? No, they weren't the kind to share. A lot of the guard worked as assassins and double agents. Hitmen. Bodyguards. They weren't used to discussing their thoughts and feelings aloud. Often, it took Hinata a good week or two to get them comfortable enough to get out something as simple as a complaint. I understand. I won't push you into sharing if you are not comfortable with it. Not like you could, either way. They were also stubborn. They had to be. With putting their life on the line on a daily basis, one would have to be stubborn to not quit immediately. This wasn't as difficult for Hinata, however. She was used to the kind. Would it be easier to just talk, then? The guard also had a tendency to hire quiet people. The kind who wouldn't blab if they were captured. Hinata didn't like thinking about it much. It made her sick. Is that not okay? He didn't bother to even acknowledge her question this time, and Hinata knew her grip was slipping. Hell, who was she kidding? It wasn't even there in the first place. The guy hadn't been particularly open since first arriving, but after the man from Sun left to get something from the bar, he had completely shut off. Even if she could see his face, she doubted it would give her much of anything. Sasuke Uchiha wasn't human. Maybe that's why they called him Thor. Because he was a god, out of reach and beyond the comprehension of mortals. Even with her eyes, she didn't stand a chance against his aloofness, but she had promised to try her hardest, and she wasn't the kind to lie about such things. And so, her eyes scoured his body language for any hint or clue of anything. His drab hid most of him, and the cross of his arms and straightness of his spine showed her he was definitely on the defense. Hinata knew she did not have an imposing figure, quite the opposite, many people have told her, so it wasn't necessarily her he was protecting himself from. It was her eyes. Because I am from Moon? She asked herself, replaying how he said that name, Moon Witch, with such disdain. That could have been a reason, or, perhaps, the power she had with them. Because if he called her Moon Witch, he must have heard the rumors that came with it, and maybe that's what he's trying to keep himself from. Either way, he didn't trust her or her eyes, and if she was going to get even a centimeter into that obsidian wall he had encased himself within, she'd have to get rid of as much of herself as possible. With a determined nod, she pulled her shawl closer and slowly closed her eyes. It was beyond terrifying to be alone with that man, especially if she could no longer see his every move, but. She piped shyly, unable to keep the shake out of her tone, may I ask you, about your sword? Not a sound came. Either he was ignoring her, or he had left the second her eyes closed. Either one was very plausible. But then, what about it? He kept that defensive edge in his voice, and it was still deep and dangerous, but Hinata had a feeling that if she just took a small step forward. It's a katana, correct? The wood of the chair shifted, and she smiled. And thus started his journey to slowly, cautiously, meet her in the middle. How do you know that? My cousin was very fond of them. The suka is slimmer than the hilt of most other swords. Her hand brushed along the table's surface to gesture in the vague direction of his left side. And I know the design of that scabbard well. When he would practice, I was allowed to play with the scabbard. I suppose it was so I would not harm myself, but I enjoyed it, either way. Another pause, this one longer. Hinata knew to wait. TCH. The sound of his tongue clicking against the back of his teeth made him sound so human, and she began to imagine him as such in the dark canvas beneath her eyelids. Open your eyes, Moon Witch. She did so without hesitation, pleased to find his arms, though still crossed, were slack. And stop avoiding my gaze. She hummed, keeping note of the revelation. I'm sorry, she said, keeping her tone gentle. I don't do it on purpose. I can't see your face well, Sasuke Uchiha. His shoulders curled, then rolled, then fell. That's probably why you were only allowed to play with the scabbard. This time, it didn't take much force for her to smile. In the background, she heard Tsunade yelling at someone. Perhaps a customer, or maybe Jiraiya. It was still early afternoon, so the place was rather vacant save from a few people near the front. Crowds passed in the hall, traveling from one universe to the other, completely unaware of the two famous figures pushed along the back corner. Hinata lolled on the idea of staying on the katana subject, but she knew it would be difficult to keep up without getting personal, and Sasuke was still far away from sharing. Thus, she grasped onto another conversation starter, one that she had been meaning to bring up since the start of their rocky introduction. I'd also like to apologize for my sudden reaching earlier. Her hand slipped off the table and went back to her lap. It wasn't my intention to upset you. Usually, I try to ask before going about it. He huffed, and his chest moved with his exhale. Is it your hobby to go around, and touch people's faces? That's how I help them, usually. She didn't try to explain, and he didn't bother to ask. That's why he brought you here, I suppose. One of his gloved hands curled into his sleeve. Not at all, Sasuke muttered. I didn't come for this. She didn't try to ask him, knowing he would not answer. But she still wondered what he could possibly mean by that. And maybe he saw the look in her eyes and was feeling generous, for his right shoulder lifted and nudged backward, directing her attention to two figures that she hadn't seen before, or rather, hadn't seen there before. Just a few minutes ago, they had been about 7 tables away. Now they were 4 away. Another click came from Sasuke, along with a buzz from somewhere near him. Boring, he murmured, uncrossing his arms so that his right hand could move to his. And before Hinata could utter a single syllable, there was, white. Those figures, 2 men with strange headbands tied tightly around their skulls, stood, and rushed forward, but then something bright flashed into the air, and they stopped dead in their tracks. Hinata had to blink to adjust her eyes to the sudden brightness, and when her vision came back to her, she saw lightning. She had to stand to get a better look, and that's when she became aware of it all. Sasuke Uchiha stood as well, back turned to her with his right hand held at his side. At his left hung an empty scabbard, for at his right, crackling along its golden tsuka, was his katana with a blade of lightning. Ah, was all Hinata could manage. Now I see why they call him Thor. Her gills shivered at the electricity that was pumped into the room. Powerful waves of heat and voltage rolled through the air. The hair on her covered forearm stood, and even her eyelashes curled in reaction to the pure, crackling blade of lightning just mere feet away from her. Peering over Sasuke's shoulder, Hinata could see the bright faces of the two men. They had sunken looks, and their hands left the inside pockets of their cloaks to raise a few inches above their heads. The blade hissed at their submission, and his right arm jerked before moving to his left. Somehow, Sasuke sheathing his katana held more reluctance than that of the men's surrender, and Hinata wasn't blind to the reason. He hesitated, not out of fear, because what did the Thor have to fear from common thugs, but out of the sheer disappointment of not having a struggle of some sort. With the blade now enclosed, the room was back to its dim glow, and Hinata only managed a brief glance at the men's pale faces before they turned on their heels and ran. Tsunade banged on the bar, cursing them on their way out, and even Jiraiya left his spot behind the counter to check if they had truly left. But Sasuke only sighed and settled back into the chair, falling once more into that semi-crossed, straight-spined posture that offered no recognition of what had just transpired. He simply grumbled under his breath, "What a ing drag," she thought she heard him say, and lifted his chin at her. She could almost see the expectation in his hidden eyes, and Hinata quickly sat herself down, still trying to calm herself. She had to wonder, it was hard not to. Who had they been after? Those men? Her? Sasuke? Or perhaps? What the hell? You just let them go, bastard. The Sun Man returned to their table, a new layer of stickers covering the entirety of his jaw. She analyzed his body, hoping he hadn't been injured in any way. There didn't seem to be any rips or tears anywhere, which told her he was nervous about something else entirely. They won't come back, Sasuke said, tapping an index finger on the tsuba of his katana. I figured they'll tell whoever hired them to give up on her. So it was about her. Wait. Hinata looked at both of them as her calming mind began to piece things together. So. Neji leaned over the back of her chair and placed a hand on the table, glowing, white eyes glaring at the tan hand that scratched the skin underneath the blue hood. So even he noticed, he mused, dark brown hair spilling over his shoulder and falling through her curled arm. That's just like him. Her imagination was getting the better of her, but before she could properly wave him off. Moon Witch. She was beginning to understand what was so haunting about Sasuke's voice. Yes, the stoic tone added some eeriness to it, and sure, his reputation as a blood spiller who wielded a blade of lightning just upped her already existing uncomfortableness. But when he spoke, she couldn't see anything. No twisting lips or flashing teeth or rolling tongue. No flexing jaw or hollow cheeks. There was nothing. He was nothing. Are they all that pathetic? Or am I not wasting my time here? But that had to be impossible. Because if he was nothing, then how did he seem to know about them, about her? Do I? Her fingers gripped her sleeve, and she blushed at her stutter, know you, somehow. Because it hadn't even been 20 minutes, and he already knew about the people who were hunting her down. Perhaps he knew of it, somehow, from the guard. Perhaps her family had contacted him. But was that it? Were they really strangers? But she's never seen him before. Nowhere in her mind came up a Sasuke Uchiha, so how? Hinata. Quote. Her name. That was her name, right? But it wasn't Sasuke who said it. It was that boyish, somewhat clumsy voice that she's been listening to for the past 5 months. The one that spoke timidly of his anxieties, the one that laughed loudly, the one that sought her out at the very beginning, when she hadn't even begun to pluck people's faces. The one that made her heart race like crazy because, despite them never sharing names, despite them never revealing their faces or speaking too precisely of their past, she knew it. She knew him. She was comfortable and calm and trusting and maybe a little smitten when it came to that recurring face of his, and for the longest time, she truly believed he had come to her innocently. But she didn't know him. Not really. But he knew that name. Which meant, tease Tsunade. Her right hand sunk into the pocket of her coat, fingers grabbing the handle of her dagger. It was the last thing she had grabbed from her home before she had to flee. Neji had given it to her years ago, when she was 16 and becoming aware of the dangers in her realm and beyond. With people actively seeking her out, Hinata Hyuga, that is, she knew she had to protect herself, so she always brought it with her, just in case. But she never dreamed that, one day, she'd have to use it against him. All this time, has he been trying to capture me, too? There was a distant crash, and she didn't have to look to know that Tsunade was storming over. With them distracted, Hinata was able to slip away and flee to the hall. She quickly grabbed the dial at the ocean gate and turned it to District 11. Her head snapped over her shoulder, making sure they weren't chasing her, and once the portal had been made, she jumped inside and dived straight into the freezing waters of her refuge. They almost got me, she had realized upon entering her coral-walled home, locking the door behind her before quickly swimming to every window. She knew they were locked. She checked every morning before leaving. But her chest was hot and heavy, and frustrated tears prickled her eyes as she tore back her curtains to check every lock she came upon. I'm so stupid. Without fail, her gaze turned to her neighbor's home. It was still and empty. Dark. He hadn't come back for a while. 10 days, maybe, since she last saw him. And she knew it was her paranoid mind speaking, but she wondered. What if he was out there somewhere, being interrogated? Were they torturing him? Did they know he helped her? Did they know he knew her? Did he tell them where she was? Was that why? She swallowed, snapped the curtains shut, and turned away. So stupid. Whenever her cover was blown, she knew she had to hide for a while. But, go. Pulling her chopsticks away from her sushi, Hinata turned to the figment of her imagination. For some reason, she felt the need to torture herself with imagining her cousin was telling her to leave. She couldn't understand why, really. She knew it was dangerous to go back up there. They were probably still looking for her. And it wasn't like she could go back to that bar anymore. Go, Lady Hinata. So why did I can't, she told him, chewing on the salmon from her sushi. She watched him swish back and forth by her low dining table, his legs moving through the wood every now and then. His repetitive movement was calming, in some way. Perhaps it was her exhausted mind speaking. She hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, but he was doing a better job at making her want to go to bed rather than back to the surface. You know I can't, Neji. He paused and regarded her, eyes void. This time is different, he said. Go. Eating the last of her sushi, Hinata got up and moved to her sink. It wasn't the same kind that she had in Moon, the kind that poured water. The sinks in Ocean blasted a sort of compressed air that did well in cleaning the dishes, though they made a terrible noise in doing so. Her brows furrowed as she turned the knob, and the faucet shook as it released a roaring air that sent bubbles all around her. She blinked, and once the plate was clean, she waved them away before turning to her cousin, who gave her an expectant look. I'm sorry, she said, smiling, but I didn't hear you over. Please. Pleading. She didn't hear that much, even in her imagination, so she was more than spooked to hear that gentle tone of his as Neji begged. This isn't like last time, he said. They can help you. Her shoulders fell. It was like she was trying to tell herself what had happened yesterday was a mere dream. She wasn't about to lie to herself and say it didn't hurt. Sometimes, those afternoons of listening that Sun Man babble as she plucked were the only things that got her up in the mornings. With them suddenly gone, she felt empty. Alone. Betrayed. He's trying to capture me, she whispered, pulling her arms around her torso. No, Neji said, he's trying to save you. How was he so sure? How was she so sure? She wanted to ask him, but he turned, a trail of bubbles following him as he moved to the front door and placed a non-existent hand on its knob. Hinata, he said, smiling at her over his shoulder. Go. ... And so, she did. To say she was surprised to find a sticker-covered face watch her every movement the moment she stepped into the room would be a lie. She had expected for at least one of them to be there. She had just hoped it was the other one. The less scary one. But Hinata made sure to wipe every ounce of disappointment off of her features as she slowly made her way to him. He had situated himself on the same chair at the same table in the same corner, and it almost made her wonder if he had budged an inch since she had left. Her gaze shifted to Tsunade behind the bar, wiping at it casually with her rag, not making an effort to greet the woman who had come in after Hinata. So she doesn't mind him, Hinata realized, heart skipping. Does that mean he's safe? Her breath caught in her lungs when she finally made it to her normal table. He didn't look away from her, and Hinata gulped before sitting herself across from him, forcing a shy smile. Sasuke Uchiha. She watched his shoulders twitch. He made her too aware of things, and she was beginning to feel like she was searching for something that wasn't even there. Good morning. He huffed and sat back, the wood of the chair creaking with him. He hired me to watch out for you, he said, tugging at the cuffs of his gloves with an air of nonchalance about him. Of course he wouldn't be nervous. He had the lightning sword. So don't run away this time. Not sure how to respond, Hinata said what she always did. May I help you with anything? The tugging stopped, and his arms crossed. Yeah. The table's surface shuddered slightly, and with a glance to the side, she noticed that his left knee was bouncing slightly. Is he getting impatient? I heard you pick at people's faces for a hobby. Suddenly, all air escaped her, and Hinata was sure she was hearing things. He wasn't. Was this, perhaps, him asking for her help? She waited for a moment, allowing him time to go back on his word or change the subject. But he didn't. They both sat in silence, nothing but a jittering, thin table between them. But then Hinata gave him a genuine smile before she raised a hand to catch Tsunade's attention. Please tell Jiraiya to make me a cup of coffee, she said, watching Sasuke closely, trying to find any indication of him wanting a cup of his own. He didn't move, and she couldn't help but laugh. I'm going to need to wake up for this one. ... Tell me what you are comfortable with sharing, Sasuke Uchiha. Minutes later, Hinata was already halfway through her first serving, and she was glad to find her tired mind begin to wake up and sharpen with awareness. Sasuke had still yet to order anything, and she made sure to not mention it. A low hum bubbled in his throat, and his chin tilted the slightest bit. Sharing is dangerous in my line of work, Moon Witch. She knew, but she nodded to make sure he knew she heard him. Then are there certain topics you wish for me to avoid? His shoulders squared. Everything, probably. At that, she couldn't help but blink. Everything. Then what do you want me to do? I have to tell you. He asked, voice clipped. I thought you knew what you were doing. And, well, in most cases, she did. But Sasuke Uchiha was most certainly not most cases. Bringing her mug to her lips, letting the steam warm the tip of her nose, Hinata pondered her possibilities. Clearly, going about it her usual way was not working, and Sasuke did well in avoiding every type of tactic she tried. This was becoming more difficult with every passing second, and she knew she couldn't help him with his troubles when he refused to tell her said troubles in the first place. It was as if Wait, it's happening again, she said, pulling away from her mug. You didn't come here for my help, did you, Sasuke Uchiha? She recalled what he had mentioned yesterday, right before the situation with the men. All this wasn't for him at all. He ordered you to watch me again. It was for her. His chest fell as he gave a deep exhale. I can't refuse, even if I wanted to. But why? She knew that man was from Sun One, so surely he had some power. Only the powerful can be from there after all. But was it really enough to hog the time of such a sought-after guard member for 2 days? Shaking her head, Hinata took another sip of her coffee before asking, so you really are trying to protect me? Wasn't it obvious? She blushed and bowed her gaze. I'm sorry. I've gotten paranoid over the months. Sasuke didn't reply. He kept to himself, looking how he did just the day before. Maybe he was focusing more on keeping an eye out for anyone else who would try to stir trouble with them. How long have they been after you? I don't remember. His face jerked her way, and she swallowed the last of her beverage before setting the mug down. Her brain was awake, but her memory was still as foggy as ever. For a while, I suppose, though I cannot pinpoint the exact date. Her mind replayed the events of yesterday, and she asked, how do you know about any of this? All that followed was the distant murmurs and clinking of glassware. Alone with him and his covered face, Hinata was beginning to really wish he would just drop his stubborn act and let her take the things off. It was hard enough to decipher his meaning behind statements with tone alone, and his body language didn't give her much, either. Things would be so much easier if he just. So you really don't remember? It wasn't a huge difference. Not at all. His voice was still low and stoic and giving her barely anything. But there was something there. It wasn't lighter or softer, just airy. And it made goosebumps run down the lengths of her arms. Hinata felt her eyes narrow in confusion, and she nearly had the mind to ask him what he meant, exactly, by that. But she decided to not waste her breath on an unanswered question and decided, instead, to say, ever since I've left Moon 2, my memory has been worse. I don't remember much of anything before leaving. Her eyes found the image of her cousin a bit away, always listening in and watching. But I won't forget him, she supposed, smiling. So you don't know who is after you, Sasuke said with a sigh. No. Her smile turned guilty. I'm sorry. And it was weird, because just an hour ago, she dreaded ever stepping foot in this place ever again. She had been scared, and for the longest time, she had run from something even she, herself, didn't know about, and sometimes, she wondered if it was even there in the first place. But now, that fear wasn't as overbearing as before. Somehow, just knowing that her worries were real and she wasn't crazy made her feel better, and even if she wanted to, Hinata couldn't hide the grin that was painted along her rosy face. Sasuke scoffed, having probably witnessed her sudden change in mood. What? I just feel safe, she told him, suddenly quite aware of how different their voices sounded. Not that it mattered. It's been a while since she felt so free, and she wasn't about to let anything stop her short of enjoying it. I know you've been ordered to stay here, but still, thank you, Sasuke Uchiha. I don't feel so terrified when you're here. First, it was his arms going lax. Then, his fingers uncurled themselves from the long sleeves of his cloak. And after that, Hinata saw it. On the right side of his face, a bit above the middle, she saw a few stickers loosen up. He grumbled to himself, totally unaware of the absolute miracle she was witnessing right then. Whatever you say, Moon Witch. And she knew to keep to herself, to ignore it and stay in her spot. But her fingers popped and itched with the urge to just pull it off, and it was right there and so ready, so she couldn't just look away and pretend she saw nothing. Gripping the edge of the table, trying to not rush and ruin her chance, she tore her eyes away from that one spot and took in his entire face. I know. I understand you don't want to be touched, she began, voice a bit hoarse. And it's not that I mean to go against your wishes, rather, I try to do the opposite. But, Sasuke Uchiha, if you'd just give me this once, and I promise I won't bother you again after this. What? He backed away from her, and his fingers fidgeted. Did I not make myself clear before, Moon Witch? The name sliced into her, and gaining control of her hands, she wrung them together and sat back into her chair. I'm sorry, she whispered. The familiar sound of him clicking his tongue sounded, and his chin lowered, as if in disapproval. Again came the silence, along with a heavy tension in the air, and Hinata blushed under its weight. He wasn't saying anything. Had she really messed up her chances that badly? Peeking up at him, her previous joy sagged, and she tried to get back any of the millimeters of progress she had made. I told you before that I couldn't see your face well. Do you remember? A minute passed, and he didn't even grant her a nod. Flinching, her gaze fell, and she continued. It's not that I'm blind, per se. Actually, it's, the opposite. My eyes let me see things. Things most others don't see. Sasuke's shoulders rolled, and then he asked, dully, like what? Well, you, she thought for a moment, then said, have you ever been to the forest realm? They have plants there, burweed, I think it's what they call it. Those plants have these things called stickers, and they're sharp and get stuck to things easily. Her gaze overlooked the mass on his face, and she tried to smile. I see that, but, they're darker, and they're usually on faces. You have a lot. His head tilted a bit, and she was able to see a muscle in his neck flex. Ah, he muttered, so that's what you do. You get them off. For the first time, his tone told her something clear. He didn't believe her. Not at all. But she didn't let that get to her as she said, with a subtle emphasis behind her voice, only if you let me. And to her surprise, his arms moved to his side completely, hanging a bit over the back of the chair, and he leaned forward. Fine. And his voice, once again, was clear and sharp with challenge, as if to see if she'd even take the invitation if he gave it to her. I'll let you. And Hinata didn't know if she should feel proud or horrified. Her fingers were slow, and she blamed it on her lack of preparedness. But in the back of her mind, fidgeting, she knew it was because she was scared. She nearly expected him to lash out like a wolf, though she knew it was a silly thought. And yet, no matter her lag or her nervousness, he didn't move or say a word. Like he was waiting. And for someone who seemed to hold his time over everything else, she knew she was experiencing another miracle in the works. Hovering her hand a few inches away, she looked at him, making sure he was totally fine with this. I won't be able to get them all off, she told him. Just a few in this area. And it won't hurt, I promise. His shoulders shook as he huffed, and that was all she needed to continue. Her fingers reached out, grabbed the sharp edge of one of the stickers, and carefully pulled it off, revealing smooth, pale skin underneath. Hinata dropped the sticker, letting it fizz out on the floor, before moving to the next one. Her other hand lightly grazed Sasuke as it gripped the back of his chair, supporting her securely to ensure she didn't fall into him. It took a few minutes to get all the loose ones off, and she was so used to hearing his even breathing so close that when she pulled back, finally done, she was a bit put off by the quiet around her. I'm done, she said. You can open your eyes now. And the part she had revealed, small as it was quite significant for her. His right eye and brow were revealed to her sight, and she watched with unfathomable excitement as his lid fluttered before opening, revealing an inky canvas beneath. You lied, by the way, he mused, trailing his gaze slowly along the table's top, up her arm, to the slope of her shoulder. There was a sort of pressure behind his gaze that she hadn't felt before. It was stunning. Not all of forest has those weeds. And then, she felt it. That pressure, that power, that electricity. It was on her hidden face, boring through the shadows, piercing into her. But I suppose Lady Hinata Hyuga wouldn't know much about weeds, now would she? Hovering in the 5 a.m. atmosphere was a sort of softness that Sasuke Uchiha absolutely hated. Maybe it was the flickering dimness of the marigold lights hanging over the bar, or it could be the hum of the distant slumbers of people who waited in their dreams for the sun to rise. Whatever it was, he didn't like it. In his line of work, this sort of quiet tranquility only came in rare occurrences, all of which were dangerous and on that thin string between life and death. And it wasn't so much that Sasuke wasn't used to being on that string, but rather he simply did not feel like balancing on it. Not today. Definitely not today. I don't see the purpose of coming so early. On the other side of the bar, right leaning at a hard angle against the mahogany shelf in the back, was a man named Kakashi Hatake. Somehow, Sasuke knew the fool. Life was like that. It dragged you in directions you really did not want to go in, and with it came all kinds of people. Annoying people, usually. The kind who read erotica while on the clock. It was a wonder the man could keep a stable job with his nose always stuck between the pages of his little books. And when he looked over the spine to give him that sort of twinkling, mischievous look, well, Sasuke always felt his right hand flex and pull towards the katana at his. All you do is sit and grumble. If anyone were here, they'd surely leave at the mere sight of you. Sasuke couldn't find it in himself to care, really. Grunting, he gestured his right shoulder to the kettle in the back, and Kakashi slid his gaze to the side, and snapped his book shut before tucking it into the back pocket of his pants. Finally having that annoying weight off his shoulders, Sasuke could once again focus on the documents laying on the bartop before him. Between the fancy statements and unnecessarily long drags of text were details of guard business. Not his business, of course, but it was often shoved to him when he had free time. Which was rare. Extremely rare. Thus here he was, looming over the fine print at 5 in the morning, mere hours before he was back on the daunting duty of. You look pale. Usually, when a voice cut his attention in half, Sasuke would have the mind to nail them with a glare, or, to the very least, a grimace. But he knew this person, heard him approach before he could even speak, really. And, sure, there was still some leftover irritation looming on his left brow, but poison didn't pour in his gaze as he rose his chin and regarded Jugo, another guard member who he's worked with a handful of times. Usually, the guard didn't go for his type, the overly obvious, somewhat soft type. He didn't hide it well, his worry for others. Especially not for his teammates, which was most likely why he was there, peering at the stack of papers just inches away from Sasuke's propped elbow. Smiling, pulling out the stool next to him, Jugo mused, "They don't let you sleep much, do they?" Sasuke snorted, clicked his pen, and turned back to his reading. That's not the problem. The clicking of a dial signaled that the oven range in the back was turned on, and when Sasuke glanced up by instinct, he was met with Kakashi's smirk. Not at all, he said, once again slipping the book out and flipping to where he had left off. Actually, I'd gamble that our Thor warrior is up to his neck with his current mission. Sasuke's narrowed his eyes, knowing his warning would not be considered, but still feeling the need to let the old man know he was treading on thin ice. To his right, Jugo blinked and rubbed at the back of his head, orange hair shifting with his fingers. That hard? Huh, no. And that was the problem. He'd been guarding the Moon Witch for 2 days now, and aside from the feeble attempts by those men, nothing had happened. No attempted kidnapping. No scuffle. No stalker. Nothing. And it was so mundane that Sasuke wanted to stab himself at points, if just to get away from that damn corner where he had to listen to the pathetic problems of strangers for hours straight. Jugo's smile turned into a sheepish grin. Whoever it is, they must be important. The Sun King asked for you specifically, didn't he? At that, Sasuke's head snapped his way, and Jugo gave a weak laugh. Karen told me. Of course she did. They weren't supposed to share classified information with members outside of their partners, of which Sasuke had zero, because it sure as hell didn't take a damn army to listen to drawn-hour conversations about love and feelings all day. And though Sasuke always complied with that rule, some members didn't see it much as a rule, but more so as a suggestion. The most notable being Karen, a member of the data team at the Guard. She was in charge of a good quarter of the missions coming in and out, as well as had a library full of records on members and criminals. She knew more about him than most people, and she took that power and flaunted it with vigor, to the point of spilling juicy bits about his current missions. She'll be here in 2 hours, Sasuke murmured, index finger curling along the corner of one of the documents, if you're so curious. He eyed Jugo in the corner of his eye, watching him, testing him to see if he would take the bait. But the man simply shook his head, smiling softly. Don't worry about me, Sasuke. I know to keep my mouth shut. That was all he needed to hear, and Sasuke nodded and refocused on the documents. He began to pick out pieces of information about Forest 6, a district known for its high crime rates. It was home to the Inuzuka, a gang of wolf people who liked to cause trouble. The Guard kept a close eye on them, but if what he was reading was true, something was stirring within that clan. Something mischievous. Karen is getting real irritated with the amount of reports coming in from Forest 6 alone, Jugo said, glancing at Kakashi curiously, only to relax significantly when realizing the man was too far into his book to hear much. They want to send you in after this mission of yours, whenever it finishes. A high whistle sounded through the bar, and Kakashi closed his book to pull the kettle off the heated range. Sasuke pulled away from the papers and moved them to the side, pinching the bridge of his nose. Today, he gritted out, tone falling a bit at the end. If it were my way, I won't have to step foot into this place for another month. Kakashi clicked his tongue as he poured 2 mugs of black tea. I'm hurt. He slid one to Jugo, who thanked him, before placing the other next to Sasuke, who watched the steam waft over the lips of the mug for a moment. And here I was thinking you were comin' so early to see me. Jugo chuckled as he blew at the beverage, then downed it in one gulp. It's always a pleasure, Kakashi. He stood from his stool and gave Sasuke's shoulder a firm squeeze. Are you done with those? They sent me to bring them back. Lifting the mug to his mouth, Sasuke grunted, and Jugo leaned over and scooped up the documents. They're thinking about sending me in. I can't say much, but, well, Karen needs me to come in later to see if all, farewell. It's gotten harder for me since he went on that long mission. I'm sure you know why. Ropes of gray twisted in the air, then disappeared. Sasuke watched for a while, vaguely listening to Jugo. It was a bit bothersome, everything about this situation was. Jugo, unless under very certain circumstances, wasn't fit well for the Guard. He talked naturally, warmly. He expressed himself freely. Not in an obnoxious sense, like some people Sasuke knew, but the whole point of being in the Guard was to do your job, and do it well. And while he went off to investigate the happenings of Forest 6, Sasuke was stuck here. With her. Do you know when he comes back? Jugo asked. No. The edge of the mug cooled slightly. But I'd rather him be here rather than me. He brought the mug to his lips, and upon taking his first swig, physically cringe at the overwhelming sweetness that filled his mouth. Spitting, he slammed the mug down, glaring. Kakashi. He flipped the page of his book, not bothering to look up and acknowledge the daggers being drilled into his skull. I'm just making sure you don't fall asleep while on the job. I'm sure he hates me. The sun was a good amount up into the sky, with shades of pink from the dawn still clinging to the horizon. It was calm, cloudless, the ocean did not move much, and nor did Neji Hyuga as his imagined gaze watched his cousin closely as she wrung saltwater from her hair. 5 months ago, it used to take up to an hour for her hair to dry, and she spent most mornings huddled along the surface of Ocean 11, ready to dive in and restart her whole process if the portal ever opened. But with time, the magic that gave her gills and kept her skin from pruning eventually reached her hair, and within a few minutes, it would be as if she had never been underwater in the first place. The sun also helped, and she smiled slightly at the warmth that came to her bare face before covering it in her shawl. Again, Neji watched. How so? Wrapping the thick material around her skull, making sure it would stay in place, she laughed. It wasn't so much bitter as it was forced, for she thought it was quite obvious. Somehow, revealing a piece of his face to her made things even worse, for now she was aware of his constant glares and stares that simply sunk into her skin. He was a quiet man, but the atmosphere surrounding him was absolutely chilling, and Hinata never imagined something more icy than the bottom of the ocean. Sasuke Uchiha hated being there, with her, and he made no move to hide it. So it was obvious, and Hinata did not know what to do about it. He has to stay, she mused, flexing her fingers, preparing them for work. He was ordered to watch me. Stuck there, for hours. And there's nothing I can do to help him. I'm aware, Neji said, moving closer to her. The water did not shift under him, but she was used to it by now. But it seems like he despises the boredom more than anything. She was just trying to comfort herself, Hinata knew. Suddenly aware of the pain along her arm, she pulled it up, pulled back the sleeve, and revealed a nasty, purple bruise along her wrist. It was big, like Sasuke's hands, and once again, Hinata laughed. Neji's left hand hovered along the bruise, not touching it, as if in fear of hurting her, but she knew he couldn't. Figments can't hurt people. They were like ghosts. Not that her cousin was a ghost. He'd have to be dead, and, surely, well, she hadn't seen him in months. Not a letter, a short visit, a whisper, but that was because he knew she was hiding, knew she had to stay away from them, and not because he was. No matter if he hates you or not, you will still go, won't you? Hinata jumped slightly and grasped the hem of her sleeve. Her cousin's eyes were nearly as bright as the sun in the sky, and they looked so real for a moment. Slowly, she looked to the gate, and nodded. Without a shift in his gaze, Neji said, "It's safe there, so go." Safe. She took a fleeting glance at her bruised wrist before hiding it beneath her sleeve. Right. But she knew her conscience was right, so with a raise in her chin, she marched across the ocean surface and started up the portal. The color spilled in and formed, and when she stepped in, she left behind an empty world with a bright sky and shimmering water. ... The hair on her arms immediately rose the moment she stepped foot into that room. Out of fear, perhaps, but Hinata supposed it was more likely due to the intense amount of electricity in the air. She didn't have to look to know he was there, in that corner. Somehow, the air was always like this when he was around. But today was different. Even her eyelashes seemed to bristle at the waves literally pouring from his form, and as she slowly made her way to her table, Hinata could not help but wonder if this was Sasuke's version of a bad mood. Good Mo. She stopped herself, words tipping on the edge of her tongue. His revealed eye did not acknowledge her at all as it glared down into the rich color of the table's wood. It was as if he were etching something into it, spelling out curses of sorts, and the buzzing in the air increased. Settling into the chair opposite of him, Hinata wriggled in the tense silence for a while, wondering to herself how she was going to go about this. He didn't seem to be in the mood for pleasantries, but nor was it in her nature to simply let this pass. Can I order you anything, Sasuke Uchiha? Coffee, perhaps. She recalled the previous morning, his flippant reaction to her own mug of spiced caffeine, and recoiled into the shell of her jacket. Maybe tea. And it was as if he grabbed lightning from the clouds and slipped it into his gaze, for when his head shot up her way, she felt every nerve in her body burn. Let me make myself clear, Moon Witch. He stood, hovering over her, taking up most of her vision. It was like he was trying to dominate the conversation, to frighten her with his size and tallness, but he didn't have to go so far. Even with him just sitting, she was small and meek compared to him. Once today is over, I'm going to do my job. My real job. And if I have to see you or that bastard ever again, one of us is going to die. His fingers curled against the table's surface as he leaned forward, dipping down to her level to engulf her in his static. And gods don't die often, now do they? Her mouth was totally dry and still. That tone and the power in his form was intimidating, but she was more daunted by the sudden shift about him. The room was practically in the midst of a thunderstorm, and then, with the click of his tongue, it was gone. Completely. No static, no ferocious heat. And that spark in his eye, so powerful that Hinata was sure she'd be seeing it in her nightmares, flickered away instantaneously, as if it were not there at all. The ink in his eye was shallow and lifeless. Sasuke pulled away and rounded the table, settling against the angle of the corner, practically melting into the shadows. The bar was back to its normal, calm atmosphere. But the hair on Hinata's arms still stood, and when she quietly excused herself to go to the bar and ask for a mug of coffee, twice the sugar, twice the cream, the swell of purple on her right wrist pulsed with unconditioned fright. Maybe I was wrong, her cousin's whispered hummed, washing over her shoulders and along her shaking arms. He sat himself on the bar's top, arms crossed and head tipped back as he exhaled inaudibly. And unlike the severity of the situation Hinata has suddenly found herself in, he smirked lightly, lips twisted with amusement. Maybe he does hate you. ... What did you say to him? Nothing at all. Why would I ever say anything to him? Stop with the bullshit, Kakashi, and tell me right now. Tsunade slammed her glass of ale on the bar, nearly shattering it under the pressure from her arm alone, and despite the loudness of it all, not many people in the bar reacted. Perhaps it was too early in the morning, or perhaps they were frequent customers who were simply used to the havoc the woman could create at any moment. It had gotten to the point that the moment Tsunade walked in to show up for her shift, some people had already begun plugging their ears with napkins and such. Even Hinata flinched upon those brown eyes flaring with displeasure when the noticeably angry Uchiha in the back corner came into her sights. We got a damn guard looking like he'll bite off the head of anyone who so much as looks at him funny, and he only gets that way when you mess with him. So Tsunade also knew about Sasuke. It shouldn't be a surprise. With her work, she met all kinds of people. But still, in all the 5 months Hinata had been here, she's never seen Tsunade and Sasuke together, so it was a wonder how she seemed to know him so well. And despite the obvious irritation just rolling off of the blonde before him, Kakashi did not once take a glance away from his book. I suppose he's just having a bad day, then. He glanced over the pages to lock gazes with Hinata, and his eyes crinkled. The man, like most people, had stickers. His covered the majority of his lower face, and despite always offering to help, Hinata's services were always kindly declined by him. But he had expressive eyes, she quickly had realized, usually when he was scheming. What? Did he say something to you, Moon? Especially when he was scheming. Don't play innocent, Tsunade hissed, turning away to pull on her black apron. Her fingers worked quickly, and she tied the strings behind her back and gave the knot a sharp pull before moving to count their stock. She already has a lot to deal with, so don't go around pissin' off guards for the sake of your damn entertainment, 'cause she's the one who has to deal with their sorry asses. Kakashi licked his thumb and turned his page, eyes widening slightly, perhaps due to having come to a particularly juicy part in the plot. I'd never dream of it, Tsunade. Huffing, Tsunade marched behind him, grabbed the strings of his apron, which were barely held together in a loose knot, and yanked them harshly, contorting them around his waist and springing a sharp gasp from him. I know what you dream of, Hitaki. Now get out. I'm on shift. Hinata watched him rub the back of his neck and he slipped his book away and did as he was told. Her coffee was nearly gone, its warmth long gone as she swished it along the white glass of the mug. Her pulse had yet to calm from the small situation before, and she wondered if it were due to the caffeine or Sasuke's level of intimidation. Probably both. Apron gone and book in his slacks pocket, Kakashi eyed her as he unrolled the sleeves of his dress shirt. He won't kill you. Somehow, the severe lack of assurance in his drawled tone did not help her at all, and he must have recognized that, for he moved over and patted her head. Not when he's on duty, at least. That just made things worse, but Hinata tried to smile, nonetheless. I know. Thank you, Kakashi. Again, his eyes crinkled. Just don't. He trailed off upon his focus drifting over her shoulder. Following his gaze, Hinata turned and noticed a rather shaken woman by the entrance. She had dark eyes that flew this way and that, and her arms were hunched around her neck, looking like a cat about to pounce. Upon those startled eyes falling on Hinata, the woman gaped and skittered her way. Unconsciously, Hinata's hand slipped to her hidden dagger, but all caution flew through the window when tears began to trickle from the woman's eyes. Why you wouldn't happen to be the Moon Witch, would you? Blinking, Hinata dropped her guard and relaxed her face. Next to her, Kakashi hummed before passing them both and moving to the exit. His eyes looked Sasuke's way, and there was something there, something noticeable, but Hinata was too caught up in things to delve further into it. I am, she whispered. Can I help you? At that, the woman let loose of her sobs, and she fell into Hinata and curled her hands into the material of her coat. Help me, please. Her cries caught the attention of the people around, and Hinata tucked her close, got a rather good look at the piles of black stickers on the woman's ears, and moved her to the back of the bar. Sit here, Hinata said, pulling out a chair for the woman, who clung to her for a second longer before sagging into the wooden seat. Hinata quickly took her spot across from her and read everything that was presented to her. She was a young woman, perhaps around her age, with long, oakish hair. Whiskers decorated her cheeks, and if the masses of stickers were not present, Hinata was sure there would have been two furry ears. But what caught her attention the most were the knuckles of the woman. White, for the most part. But they were also red with dried blood, and Hinata saw that the end of her sleeves were torn terribly. May I ask for your name? Ta. She swallowed hard, eyes grounded onto the table, chin never lifting once to meet her gaze, Tamaki. She had pale skin that sunk under her cheekbones, and there were bags beneath her bloodshot eyes. Smiling kindly, relaxing her shoulders as to not seem imposing, Hinata folded her hands on top of the table. Call me Moon. How did you hear of me? Tamaki rubbed her forearm. Everyone knows you. How can I help you? Those eyes stayed bowed, even as she pulled up her sleeves, revealing nasty, oozing wounds and tan scars along the lengths of her arms. It wasn't so much that Hinata was unused to seeing such wounds. Many people who came to her had some sort, whether it be physically or mentally. But there was something about them that simply made her stomach churn, a sort of jagged skillfulness to them. Whoever had done that, knew what they were doing. From behind her, Sasuke pushed off the wall, and she heard the slice of his katana leaving his scabbard. Tamaki's head shot up, and she stared at him, gaped at him, trembled at the mere sight of him, and, sure, Hinata was intimidated by that Thor warrior that had hovered in the shadows around her for the last few days. But Tamaki looked horrified, and her pale face went white and ill. Don't, she yelled, nearly falling out of her chair, if just to keep a distance between her and Sasuke. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. Hinata stood and whirled around, taken aback for a moment at the sight of that blade of raw electricity buzzing at his wait, she told him, hands raised up as she positioned herself between him and Tamaki. Give her space, Sasuke Uchiha. I need to help her. He did not speak. Gaze smoldering, he stared at the bent-over form of the woman, seeming to focus on something Hinata could not understand. But then his one eye blinked, and he sheathed his katana and settled back, crossing his arms with arched, broad shoulder. Why is he acting like this? Hinata watched him for a moment more, then tilted her chin towards Tamaki. Does he think she's dangerous? And once again, caution filled her lungs as she slowly turned back. Tamaki, she whispered, sliding into her seat, who did that to you? But those eyes refused to look at her. Instead, they darted at every movement the Uchiha behind her made. Moon, please, she said, eyes shining desperately in the orange lighting, I don't want him here. Why? Was she secretive? Or was she truly afraid of the reputation Sasuke had? Or was she dangerous and trying to get her alone? Tamaki, let me help you. Finally, she looked at Hinata, and her chin bowed once more. Some color came to her face, but there was a terrible tremble to her entire form as she mumbled, my boyfriend. Boyfriend. Hinata turned to Sasuke. No wonder she's terrified. Could you please give us some privacy? Not a molecule of him moved. He had himself planted like a statue. She should have expected much. If she had learned anything about Sasuke Uchiha, it was that he was a stubborn, impatient, easily bored man. And, perhaps, he didn't trust her, either. Not so much in the way that he thought she'd stab him in the back if he turned away. He didn't, right, but perhaps in the way where he didn't trust her to keep herself alive and safe if he left. But she had been by herself for 5 months now, and she wasn't about to let her record end now. Offering a smile that was slightly tight at the corners, she said, with a force behind her tone, I'll be fine. I promise. His face and posture did not change, but he eventually stepped out from the shadows and left that corner. She followed him with her eyes to the bar, met Tsunade's equally confused expression, and then turned back to Tamaki, who had visibly relaxed once he was further away. I'm sorry, she said, trying to smile. He just scared me. Hinata waved her hand. Please don't worry. I'm sure the privacy will help you relax some. And though Tamaki still seemed to glance over and shudder at the faraway form of the guard member, her smile, though small and unsure, stayed, and Hinata knew she could take it to the next step. Sweeping an arm over the table, her fingertips hovered over the scars, both fresh and old, on those arms. Tamaki did not flinch. Instead, she seemed fine in letting them be inspected. Tell me exactly why you came to me for help. I've heard stories of you, she said, long, brown hair slipping over her shoulder, hiding some of her ears. Stories of great kindness and empathy. I don't have anyone else to go to. Those eyes sparkled with tears, then blinked rapidly. I can't go back to him. I need to get away, but, as previously mentioned, it was not a difficult task for Hinata to put herself in the shoes of others, but it wasn't so much that she was relating to Tamaki, but more so that she was listening to an old version of herself. The Hinata 5 months ago, scared and begging strangers for help. The circumstances were different, but the likeness was uncanny. Pulling her hand away to curl it along her lap, Hinata sat back and thought. When she had needed help, someone had given it. Now, I can't provide permanent help. Clearly, having Tamaki stay with her would just put her in more danger, not to mention the loads of secrets she'd have to feverishly keep from her. But I can give you a temporary place to stay while helping you find somewhere far away. Tamaki's gaze was wide and surprised, and Hinata smiled. Where do you live? In Forest 6. Flinching, Tamaki lowered her gaze and grazed her teeth over her bottom lip. With him. Then I'll help you get out of forest. We can look at sand, or even ocean, if need be. The stickers on her ears wiggled and loosened, and Tamaki sniffed and blinked her tears away once more, whispering, "Thank you." Hinata placed her hands on the table, fingers flexing slightly. "Can I touch your face, Tamaki?" She nodded, and Hinata leaned forward, swept back thick, brown hair, and began to remove the stickers from her left ear. The ones on the right were still stuck and firm, but she managed to clear up the entire left one, revealing light tan fur. Pulling away, she told Tamaki she was finished, and she finally smiled brightly. "Can I request one last thing from you, Moon?" Hinata's shoulders straightened. "Of course. I need to get a few things from my home." That once bright smile sunk into a pursed line. "Important things. Things that he might break or throw away if he sees I don't come home tonight. But if he's there, he might hurt me again." And her voice cracked, and Tamaki had to clear her throat to maintain a clear tone. "Do you think you can come with me?" That was tricky. Hinata knew she shouldn't go anywhere past the hall in Ocean 11, and even if she wanted to, Sasuke was still a few feet away, ready to stop her from making any stupid moves. But there was clear desperation in Tamaki's tone that threw Hinata in a whirlwind of guilt. I'm sorry, but I can't." Oh. Standing, smiling awkwardly with a bit of a frown between her brows, Tamaki nodded and rubbed her forearm again. "I get it. I don't want to go, either." She looked over her shoulder, towards the exit of the bar, and then turned back. "Can you take me to the Earth Gate, then?" Knowing that was the least she could do, Hinata nodded and stood, rounding the table to join Tamaki at her side. They both made their way to the exit, and when she looked back, she saw Sasuke's one glaring eye. "What the hell are you doing?" It practically growled, and electricity shot down her spine. "I'll be fine," she mouthed as he began to move away from the bar. "Stay there." He stilled, looking odd in the middle of the room, like a dark mass surrounded by a light, gentle atmosphere. She did not like leaving him there, treating him like heavy luggage that she did not want to bother with, and, sure, he was intimidating, but she knew he was trying to get through this boring job of his. Telling herself to come back quickly and maybe apologize, though she doubted it would do anything for him, Hinata picked up her pace, and both she and Tamaki quickly made their way to the Earth Gate. A hand, cold but still, grabbed hers, and Hinata looked down at it as Tamaki turned the dial. "You'll be alright," she said, putting as much reassurance in her squeeze back. The portal began to stitch together, greens and turquoise flashing before them. "Just be quick, and you'll be fine. I'll be waiting here." That hand slipped up and grasped her elbow, and when Hinata looked up, Tamaki's smile was tight. "Thank you, Hinata. With that name, she knew she should have ran immediately. She should have put some distance, to the very least, between them. But she was still, and all she could do was look up at the number above the large gate and realize, with a stone in her stomach, that this wasn't going to Forest 6 at all. Forest 3. The grip around her elbow tightened, and Hinata's fight-or-flight senses finally roared through her body. Jerking away, Hinata tried to pull back and escape Tamaki's grasp. But she was too late, too weak. Tamaki had already yanked her forward, into the portal, and color spun around them as the air grew hot and humid. Away with the quiet murmur of the bar, now replaced with birds and flapping leaves and... Well, Hinata couldn't be too sure. Her heart was beating wildly in her chest, but she was sure there was also screaming. Terrible screaming. Blood-curdling screaming. Tamaki's grip slackened, but there was a final, sharp pull, and Hinata was sent into the lush grass below. The dirt was moist and cold. The heels of her palms flew out to catch herself, and in doing so, caught the edge of sharp rocks. It stung. Everything did. But there was no knife in her back or hand pulling at her hair, so Hinata knew she had time. Time to run, to get back to the bar, to Tsunade, to Sasuke. Thump. Breathing haggardly, she got to her knees, head shooting up at the sound that thundered right before her. And for a while, All she could hear was singing birds and her own, screaming heart. But then came the hiss of electricity as a blade of lightning flashed before her eyes. Sasuke Uchiha stood before her, hovering, looming, towering. And at his feet, smelling of burned flesh as a gushing hole in her chest gaped and trembled, was Tamaki. Scarred, fallen, dead. Every joint in Hinata's body locked, and she was stuck on her hands and knees. To anyone else, it would look as if she were begging for her life, and maybe she was. Was she? She couldn't remember. Her head was still in that portal, in that whirling color. All she knew was this was Forest 3 and it was hot and Sasuke was by the bar, glaring, wondering why she was so stupid. She would have to apologize. She'd have to tell him that Neji was usually the one to keep her out of trouble. But he wasn't around. Not even her figment, and Sasuke. Why are you? Oh. The man from Sun 1. He was here. In Forest 3. And from her spot on the grassy ground, she could see under his hood, see the wide, blue eyes that stared at her like she had grown horns. She's seen those eyes before. Hasn't she? It was hard to reconnect with everything happening before her. All she knew was that a sharp pain ran up her arm as someone grabbed her swollen wrist. She was yanked to her feet so quickly that she almost toppled over again, and once again, blues and greens swirled and whirled and twirled around her, making her sick and nauseous. And that smell, that smoky, disgusting smell. The bar roared with life, and Hinata finally began to piece things together. Sasuke had taken her back. Tsunade stared at them, eyes narrow and lips frowning as she rounded the bar. Jiraiya, who must have just shown up for his shift, began to escort people out of the bar. There was a lot of noise. Hinata wasn't sure why until a noticeable shift came from Sasuke, and she looked over to find him dropping Tamaki's corpse on a table. He brought her here with them. Why? He didn't let go of her until they were at her normal corner, in which he practically threw her, as well, to the chair. Shaking, wobbling, but glad to be off her weak knees, Hinata sat down and tried to catch her breath. She watched Sasuke turn back to the corpse, ripping away its thin jacket, smearing blood along his gloves. He pulled something out from beneath the mess of ripped cloth and threw it on the table in front of Hinata. It clanked and shuddered, and when she looked down, she found the edge of a dagger pointing at her. Her dagger. If I had known you wanted to get killed so badly, Sasuke muttered, pinning her down, then I wouldn't have followed you. The bar was empty. Tsunade and Jiraiya had done well in escorting everyone out and closing it down. The windows were blinded and thick, and metal bars were pulled down the doorways to keep anyone from entering. But before it was completely locked off, someone slipped in. Someone familiar. What the hell happened in Forest 3? The lights blinked and buzzed above as the cloaked figure of the Sun 1 man marched over. His eyes were hidden once more, but Hinata still had the look of them tattooed along the side of her brain. His chin turned first to her, then to Tamaki's body that lay unceremoniously on the table, then to Sasuke. His stickered lips twisted. Who is she? Sasuke was in the midst of removing his bloody gloves, and not once did his head turn or tilt or raise to regard the powerful voice before him. Not sure, he said, casually. That scared Hinata beyond belief. There was a dead body right there. Even if he were a guard, how could he be so apathetic? A spy, I'm assuming. Or, that one, black eye slid her way, a stalker. Stalker. The air went frigid at that single word, and the only one seemingly unaffected by it would be the one who spoke it. Hinata felt her skin rise, and the Sun 1 man grimaced before turning to her. Are you alright, Hinata? What do you take me for? Sasuke cut in, tone low and sneering. Some half-wit. I did my job. She's breathing. She's conscious, and even if she weren't, you can't blame me for this mess. His left shoulder rolled to Tamaki. You know how to pick them, Naruto. Her brain jolted and stung. Why was that so familiar? She knew it from somewhere. How? Take this body to the guard. Sasuke's tone was intimidating, but this one, it was terrorizing. Frightfully so. Because Hinata expected such a voice from Sasuke. That's all she's ever known of him in their short time of knowing each other, really. But this wasn't Sasuke. This was. He was. Who is he? Suddenly, Hinata became aware of how in the dark she actually was. About him. For 5 months, he's been coming to her. Talking with her. Venting to her. Sharing his thoughts and stories with her. She never learned his name, but she never thought that was all she needed to know someone. But she was wrong. Because in all this time, she could have never imagined that boyish man could ever speak like that. Sternly. Coldly. Harshly. Report what happened. Let them figure out who she is, he continued, words straight and unwavering. And on your way there, remind yourself how to address me. Sasuke didn't even blink. And were his face bare to her, Hinata was sure she'd be witnessing a sly, sarcastic smirk curl upon his mouth. But it's my duty to protect her, my grace. Are you going against my orders? Again. The air was like that of Forest 3. Hot. Tense. Sasuke regarded the empty room for a moment, left finger tapping idly on the tsuka of his katana. Then, with a shake to his shoulders, he huffed. His black cloak moved and shifted, then it pulled away from his back as huge, white wings sprung from his back. They were taut and mighty. Capable. Hinata used to see wings all the time, they shouldn't be so stunning. But, they were, and the last gallon of air left her lungs in a rush, leaving her shaking and drowning in her own shock. Sasuke Uchiha of Cloud 8. Of course he would have wings. She was being stupid again. Watch her while I'm gone, he muttered, grabbing Tamaki's corpse and throwing it over his shoulder. Like it were a bag. She has an irritating tendency to attract trouble. And with that, he shot in the air, flew through the doorway that Tsunade had opened up for him, over the crowd of people who had stuck around to get a curious peek inside, and into the hall. Hey, are you alright? It was still replaying in her head. The bleeding wound. The paleness of Tamaki's dead face. And she couldn't help looking at that picture that was burned into her mind. Sasuke stood, with a corpse casually over his shoulder. Casually. A corpse. He doesn't care. Somehow, that was all she needed to say for him to understand what she meant. Sighing, a tan hand sneaking under his hood to rub at his neck, he said, she tried to kill you. Hinata flinched. How does he know that? Did he watch it all happen? And he cursed under his breath. Sorry. I didn't mean. He stopped himself again and walked over to her table, hovering about the chair near her. Hinata. He kept saying it. That name. Her name. How did he know it? The corners of her vision blurred, but she could make out him waving someone over. Soon, a glass of water was placed in front of her, and as she downed it, she felt Tsunade rub her shoulder, asking if she needed more. Hinata nodded and thanked her, trying to smile to show the water was already helping. Mind clear, she thought back to the conversation a few moments ago, mind still rolling a piece of information within her head. Why she cleared her throat, blushing. You're Naruto Uzumaki. She'd pieced it together when Sasuke had been speaking. My grace, he had said. And that's when she could bring meaning to the familiarity that name gave her. He was that Naruto, the Sun King. The Apollo. It made sense, now that she was thinking back on this. Sun 1 was the most prestigious district in Sun, and no wonder he was able to take dibs on the powerful Thor warrior without much difficulty. The chair before her screeched as it was pulled back, and Naruto, with an awkward smile, sat. Don't you already know that? He asked. She wasn't totally sure what he meant by that. I know of you. But, of course, well, I'm sure my father must have told me much about you. Surely, he had. The Hyuga were a noble family in Moon 2, and nobles were often close to their kings and the kings of other districts and realms. She must have been taught the power the Sun King had, the respect he deserved for being in such a mighty and important role, and oh my goodness. And just days ago, she had been talking to him casually, touching his face and spying on him and I am so sorry, my grace. Hinata yelped, head automatically bowing. She expected to get what Sasuke had gotten, remind yourself how to address me, but instead, please don't start with that again, Hinata. Slowly, she lifted her head to witness him rub at his eyes. It took me, like, 2 years to stop you the first time. She didn't have time to dwell on what he had just said, for he distracted her with a bright, lopsided grin. Just Naruto, Hinata. We're friends, aren't we? He said that jokingly, she was sure. But, we are. But that wasn't possible. They've never met before, couldn't have, really. Because he was Sun, and Sun can't fly in Moon or vice versa. Her father had told her so, he had, right. And her father was not the sort to lie about small things. Huh, Naruto's grin simmered. Yeah, of course. Because. He sat forward in his chair, eyeing the glass between Hinata's hands. You really don't know what I'm talking about. Her tongue went dry, and her gaze bowed. I apologize, my grace. Naruto. Just Naruto. He rubbed his jaw, fingers doing nothing to remove the stickers that hung on. Did this happen when you left Moon? You know about that, your family mentioned it to me, once. What? Said you had a stalker that would go at any length to steal you away, so they made you leave. I was gonna help, provide some guards, or something, but when I came back, you had already left, and your family was gone. It was hard to believe what she was hearing. Like this was a dream she'd wake up from. Not in the bed of her home in Moon, that was too far away to be a part of the dream. But Hinata was wondering if, in a few moments, she'd open her eyes to the cold, salty waters of Ocean 11 and realize there had never been a Naruto Uzumaki or Sasuke Uchiha in her life. Have you seen them at all, Hinata? Your parents? Neji. But she knew that was impossible, and, maybe, wishful thinking. Because when she dreamed, she didn't have Neji's figmented form by her right shoulder, peering down at the Sun King with staunch eyes. She couldn't dream and pretend at the same time. And no. Her head began to hurt, and Neji's ghostly fingers trailed her forehead. I don't. Hey. Naruto piped up, gesturing at her glass, reminding her that she still had some water left. Don't strain yourself, okay? They're probably hiding, too. He smiled genuinely, and she marveled at his strength to do something so difficult in such a tense atmosphere. Can't say that sounds much like your father, but nor does sending you off, so. And, once again, that smile morphed into a grin. I'm just happy you're okay. I've always known it was you, but didn't mention anything cause I figured you knew it was me, too. Tipping her head downwards, she could get a glance at his shifting eyes as more of the weeds sprouted on his face. Hating the sight of them, of knowing how much stress she alone had put him through, Hinata popped her fingers and leaned forward, slightly over the table. My grak. Naruto. That alone got a few of them loose as he stared at her, and she tried to match his grin. Let me help you with that. He looked puzzled for a moment, then realized what she meant and leaned in to give her access. Her thumb brushed the left edge of his jaw. I'm sorry for all the trouble I put you through. It wasn't any trouble, Hinata. That managed to clear up most of his chin. He waited for her to move on before speaking, if only to not give her more trouble as she plucked. I just wanted to make sure you were safe, so that when you can go back home, your cousin won't wring my neck. Her cousin huffed, and she was sure they both heard the worry in his tone, hidden behind his pseudo-humor. I'm in Ocean 11, she began, hoping that by sharing as much as she could with him, his mind would be eased some. Her finger brushed away a few stickers, telling her she was doing well in her task. It's dark and cold, but I'm safe. I miss my family, but I'm not totally alone. I have Tsunade and Jiraiya and Kakashi. I have you. Over his shoulder, she saw the bars pull up, and in came a dark face with white wings tucking under a black cloak. Something about him was more, well, relaxed wasn't the right word. Composed, maybe, and Hinata smiled. And I suppose I have Sasuke Uchiha, as well. She pulled her hands away as he approached, right eye giving her nothing on his current mood. Not for long, he said. Naruto turned and stood, and Sasuke folded his arms. It'll take them a while to figure everything out, but I'll tell you what I know. He rolled up his sleeve and ran his index and middle finger along the bare skin in patterns Hinata remembered. They mimicked the scars Tamaki had. She had cuts on her arms. Shallow. Precise. No sign of struggle. Either the person who did it to her had her restrained and knew exactly what he was doing, or she did it herself. Naruto dropped his head in thought, but Hinata still saw his eyes narrow. You think she cut herself on purpose? Sasuke his head Hinata's direction. I think she knew who she was dealing with and made her story as believable as possible to get the Moon Witch's sympathy. Naruto's chest expanded as he took a deep breath in through his nose. Then is she the stalker? Can't be, Sasuke mused. No holes in her back. She doesn't have wings. They both looked at her, and Hinata felt smaller than she usually did. Then, Sasuke turned away, towards the exit. You still have a stalker on your hands, and you're gonna need a new bodyguard. Right. After all that's happened today, Hinata had nearly forgotten that today was Sasuke's last day protecting her. She wasn't sure if she should feel relieved, or scared. But one glance at Naruto told her he was displeased, and at the end of his ropes. You have until midnight, he finally said, tone a bit lighter than the one he previously used, but still gravelly and serious. Bring me the papers on the body when they're done. I'll expect them by morning tomorrow. After that, Naruto trailed off, humming, and then shook his head and shot her a smile. I mean, there's lots of you guys, I can still get a guard to watch you, even if it ain't the best one. He elbowed Sasuke, who stayed still. Oi, across the room, Tsunade called to them, a glass of red wine to her lips as she peeked out from under the blind of a window. I have a business to run, so if you three are done chit-chatting it up, I'd like to make some money today. At that, Naruto left and bounced over to her, fixing his cloak to hide his face more. Sorry about that, Granny. Just doing Sun King work, you know how it is. Call me that one more time, boy. I dare ya. Hinata watched them for a while, smiling. She wondered if everyone at the bar knew about him, about them. Maybe there were signs she just hadn't noticed, but now she knew, so it was fine. Right. She blinked when a black cloak whisked past her, and when she turned, she found Sasuke right where she expected him to be. Against the wall, in the corner, arms folded and eyes staring off at nothing. The past few days have been tense with him, and Hinata still felt uncomfortable with just them around. But she knew his type, and despite his coldness, he had saved her life. So, with a shy turn to her lips, she sat herself in her chair, placed her hands on her lips, and called Jiraiya over to order 2 mugs of coffee. One with loads of cream, and the other plain and black. He didn't drink it. She hadn't expected him to. But an hour later, when the bar was back in business and the coffee was cold, she had returned from giving Tsunade the 2 cups to a few silver coins on the table. Sasuke said nothing, and nor did she as she slipped them into her purse with a secret smile. Sasuke Uchiha. For the first time, she saw his eye twinge at the name, and she rolled back and tried again. Sasuke. Silence, again, but there was no flinching or twinging, so she supposed he preferred she call him that from now on. Could you please take me to the ocean gate? It was late, Around 11 at night, she supposed, and she could tell they were both overwhelmed by the active crowd poured into the bar. Over heads and shoulders, Hinata caught glances of Tsunade and Kakashi working double time, and she made sure to not give them any more work by sipping slowly on her water. Once she was done, she had slipped through the crowd to hand it to them, and once she was back, Sasuke was standing by the table, watching her. At her request came no protests, so Hinata turned and led the way. It was easy for her to slip past people, but she silently wondered if Sasuke was able to keep up. However, upon a flittering glance over her shoulder, she saw that people simply moved away from him, and she supposed she should have just assumed that would have been the case for him. The hall was nearly empty, save a few people spotted here and there. Hinata took in the cool air, let it calm her lungs, and turned to Sasuke. He was already making his way to the ocean gate, and it was her turn to follow him. Sasuke, she called. He didn't stop, but his shoulder lowered an inch, signaling he was listening. Can I speak to you, quickly? He paused in front of the gate, looking towards the dial. She moved to it, but did not move it. Not yet. Folding her hands, knowing this was the last time she'd probably ever see him, Hinata told herself to throw caution in the wind and simply speak her mind. It was hard to do, but she didn't like to live life with regret. She's heard enough stories from people seeking her out of regret and the wish to turn back time, and she's found herself trying to avoid those feelings as much as possible. With a sigh, she looked at his mostly covered face, and said, "Thank you." As expected, he didn't react, but she kept going. I didn't say it earlier because I was in shock. But thank you for saving my life, for protecting me. A tremble came to her hands as memories of early that day came back, and she squeezed her hands together. And I'm sorry for not staying in the bar. For being a bother. I know this job wasn't the most exciting, and I'm sure you were, bored more often than not. She smiled, but he didn't smile back. She didn't need to see his mouth to know that much. Whatever you do after this, I hope it's more thrilling than sitting in a bar for 3 days. Just fly back. Her mouth hung slightly, as she wasn't expecting him to add to this one-sided conversation. Pardon? She asked. His eye narrowed slightly. I know most of it. About what happened to you. If you want to go so badly, then go. I would have gone with you, and all of this wouldn't have happened. But you just stayed. His voice came out sharp, cruel, but it didn't have its normal effect on her. Maybe she really had gotten used to him. Her right hand reached out and turned the dial to Ocean 11. The portal hissed and morphed, and the familiar smell of saltwater returned. I can't, she whispered, voice overwhelmed by the buzzing. I don't have wings. Not anymore. And, of course, she expected disbelief. Sky people don't just lose their wings. She even went as far as to guess he'd say one of two things. You're lying. Or, I didn't ask. But, once again, it was made painfully obvious that Hinata knew nothing about Sasuke Uchiha, for the only thing that she saw spurling in that ink iris of his was. What was that? His brow was relaxed, and his gaze was far off. Foggy. He was remembering something. And the stickers on his forehead shifted and loosened, but Hinata had to hold back the itch to reach out and pluck them. Right, he said, then hardened his gaze. Go home. Her hand slipped off the dial, and she nodded. Do I say goodbye? Good luck. It was nice meeting you. Would that be a lie? But before she knew it, she was on the surface of the ocean, and her back stung as she tilted her head back and basked in the moonlight. Naruto Uzumaki loved the light. Maybe, that was an obvious statement. But there were lots of reasons as to why. The most notable being, here, that Sasuke Uchiha absolutely loathed it. Turning away from the shining city that sat, like a painting, outside of the grand window of his office, Naruto turned just in time to see Sasuke throw a manila folder on his desk. The irritation pouring from his made Naruto grin, and he whisked over and tore the folder open. Right on time, as per usual. Over the edge of the paper, he saw Sasuke frown. Apparently, it wasn't hard to figure her out. She's been in our records for a while. Skimming over a few paragraphs, Naruto's gaze landed on a picture of the woman. She was smiling in it, an odd sight to find on a guard record. Reading a bit more, his smile shortened and shortened until it was gone completely. Forest 6, he said, looking up at Sasuke. Then why was she dragging Hinata to Forest 3? Sasuke stepped closer to flip to another page in the stack Naruto was holding. He pointed to a paragraph, and said, mind control. At that, Naruto felt color vanish from his face. There weren't many mind controllers in Forest 3, but the few there were happened to be people he knew. People he was relatively close to. The guard doesn't know anything aside from that, Sasuke said, already knowing where his mind was going. This is just suspicion. Nodding, Naruto flipped through a few more pages. Only 2 weeks of being under it, huh? On and off. So she really wasn't the stalker. Gritting his teeth, Naruto returned the records to the folder and threw it on his desk. I'll go over it in detail when I have the time. Rolling his shoulder, rubbing at a spot in the back, he moved to his chair, and said, "You're free to go, Sasuke." No footfalls or closing doors followed, and Naruto, now comfortably sat in his cushioned chair, looked up to find him still standing there. Usually, Sasuke was hightailing it out of sun when given the permission to leave. As there, he grinned, something else. Silence, for a while. Not the kind where the guy was trying to think of something to say. Naruto's known him long enough to know that Sasuke always has something to say. But if he wanted to actually say it or not, well. You said you were going to look for someone else, Sasuke finally mentioned, gaze on his face, but not totally meeting his eye. I have a suggestion. Now that was a surprise. Naruto almost had the mind to remind Sasuke of how much he hated his job protecting Hinata, but he knew that would make him shut up before even saying anything, so Naruto held his tongue and pulled out something to write on. I'm all ears.